My name is Sean Wilson. I'm Artistic Director of the Ottawa International Writers Festival. On behalf of the festival and our partners, the Ottawa Public Library and Library and Archives Canada, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event. We're broadcasting from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, and our official bookseller is Perfect Books on Elgin Street. Wherever you are, we hope you're able to support your local independent bookseller and tonight's author by buying between 3 and 16 copies of her amazing book. Our host this evening is Lucy van Oldenbarneveld, who is part of the Canadian Screen Award-winning team at CBC Ottawa. And given that today the Scotiabank Giller Prize announced their long list, you may want to subscribe to our podcast and also visit us online at writersfestival.org, where you can catch Lucy in conversation with Emily St. John Mandel and Lucy's colleague, Adrian Harewood, with Thomas King. Most of this year's nominees are part of our virtual season, so please do visit us online to see what's on offer. As always, I want to thank our festival members for supporting great writing through these difficult times, and to thank you all for tuning in. I know that fear is top of mind here in Ottawa as COVID cases are on the rise and schools are reopening. There's lots to cover tonight, and Eva has written a fantastic book. So let's get me out of the way and welcome our host, Lucy van Oldenbarneveld.
Oh, thank you very much, Sean. And we never want to get you out of the way, but thank you for that introduction. You set us up so well. I am really looking forward to this conversation with Eva Holland. I mean, for any of us who have had phobias or fears, this book is something that you want to pick up and you want to pour through, because Eva takes us through her own journey and also has some great suggestions and tips on how to cope with a phobia or a fear. So another one of the questions that she takes on here is, how does fear limit us, and how can we move past the sweaty palm, heart racing, dry mouth things that trigger our fears? Eva Holland, if you consult her biography, lifestyle, and writing history, is by all indications a fearless adventurer. But there were a few things that tripped her up over the course of her life: heights and driving a car. Then when Eva's mother died unexpectedly, which, as Eva describes, was, as an only child, her worst fear come true, she turned that fear and grief into a book and a self-exploration that helps all of us understand what might make us afraid and why. Eva also explores some of the therapies that she tried in order to conquer or at least understand her fears. And Eva Holland joins us now from her home in Whitehorse, Yukon. Hi, Eva.
Hi.
So great to have you there and ready for this conversation. I'm sorry that you're not here in person. COVID keeping you away from your hometown. Am I right?
Yeah. I grew up mostly in Ottawa. We moved around a little bit, but yeah, good glebe girl.
What has COVID-19 done to your book release plans? How has that all changed almost everything?
I mean, it changed everything except for that the book exists in the world now, I guess. My book came out April 7th in Canada. So that was, I think, about 3 weeks into our sort of early lockdown. My book launch party here in Whitehorse at a local restaurant was, of course, canceled. My book tour, I was going to be going all over Canada in April, May, was canceled. And for a while, a lot of bookstores weren't even open. So it all felt sort of abstract sitting in my apartment and thinking my book exists. But I was actually in self-isolation when my book came out, so I couldn't even go to the bookstore and see it at first. But it's been really cool to find, other ways to celebrate and to connect with people. Events like this one, some Zoom cocktails have been had. Yeah. So we've been making the best of it.
There are many beginnings or many impetuses for why you decided to write this book. As I mentioned, heights, driving a car, but you've said that you thought about tackling your fears and this book and writing a book after your mother's unexpected death 5 years ago. So can we start there, Eva? Can you take us back 5 years ago and where you got the call, where you were, and how you got to her bedside?
Sure. So in July 2015, I was on a 2-week backcountry canoe trip in far northern BC. A river called the Stikine River sort of traverses part of northwestern northern BC, and outlets in coastal Alaska. And I was there with 11 friends. And we had gone, we were in a campsite where there was sort of a portage you could do to a day trip. And we came back to our campsite that night and found a note pinned to a picnic table with a rock, and it said, "Eva Holland, call your cousin Nathan immediately about your mom." So we had a satellite phone with us, and I called Nathan, who's my cousin here in Whitehorse, and he said, your mom's had a stroke back in Ottawa. It was actually, by this time, I think it was Sunday night, and she had the stroke on Friday night, but it took them that long to sort of, they ended up finding a fisheries officer to sort of motor up the river looking for us because we weren't reachable. And I ended up getting a ride out to the coast in a cannery boat. And then Nathan had booked me a series of flights from rural Alaska to Seattle to Toronto to Ottawa. I think I got to the Civic Hospital Wednesday morning. So the whole thing was sort of a crazy cross-continental saga to get there. And she had a sort of a catastrophic stroke on Friday night and had never woken up. And we removed her from life support on Friday, and she died a few minutes later.
I mean, that is quite a call to get, but also quite a journey to take on your own through all these crazy modes of transportation. What do you remember thinking about you, where you were, about your mom, about the terror that might have been lurking within at that point?
Yeah, it probably sounds strange to say if you don't know the backstory, which is, in the book, but it felt inevitable. I always had worried that my mom would die young. It was something that had been on my mind because she had lost both her parents when she was quite young, and I had grown up hearing about that loss and hearing about her parents and the effect that their loss had on her. And so I remember sitting in my tent, before I started my sort of evacuation adventure and thinking, like, of course this is happening right now. Of course this is happening. I didn't obviously predict the exact timing or anything, but it felt inevitable that I wouldn't get to see her grow old, I guess. So I was maybe not as shocked as some people would have been, but it was still a horrible 48 hours trying to get across the country and then able to get to the airport in Ottawa and get to my family at the hospital.
And then, of course, dealing with the aftermath of her passing and the grief and the fear that was now front and center. So can you just tell us a bit about what pushed you into wanting to more closely examine your fear as a result of her death?
Mm-hmm. So it was actually, I had feared this outcome for so long. And when it happened, I thought, this is it. This is going to be, I'm never going to, be okay again, because my mom had a lot of emotional fallout from her parents' deaths, and so I assumed that was inevitable for me too. But actually, what happened and what prompted me to write the book is that after sort of 3 to 6 months of acute grief, I realized that actually I was going to be okay, and that my worst fear had come true, and it wasn't so bad. I miss my mom. I'll always miss my mom, but I wasn't sort of undone by her death in the ways that she had been harmed by her parents dying for various reasons. And that ended up feeling empowering, even though I was still really sad. I was like, oh, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to miss her, and I'm going to still have a good life and be a happy person. And that made me think, well, okay, if you've just survived the thing that you were most scared of in the entire world, and you've come out, stronger and wiser or whatever, maybe there's something you can do with your other fears. Maybe facing them is actually going to be less scary than continuing to live with them.
So then you began with this thing. And two of the things that you really talk about in the book that you critical things that you want to overcome: your fear of heights and car crashes. So let's chat separately about those, starting with heights. Many people are afraid of heights, but you had some real memorable times where, as somebody who's afraid of heights, you were regularly going on rock climbing trips. So just tell us about that climbing trip that really had an impact, the one that you opened the book with. You froze and you couldn't continue. What happened there?
In February 2016, so about 6 months after my mom died, I went on an ice climbing trip along the Alaska Highway in far northern BC with friends. And I had a panic attack like I'd never had before on the way down. I had actually finished the descent from the climb, but now we had this hike down a frozen creek to complete before we could get back to the car. And I was just worn out from the climbing and wet and cold, and it was getting dark, and I just froze. My body refused to move. And I told everyone to go on without me and leave me there, which obviously they weren't going to do. And it took quite a long time for them to talk me into actually taking that first step. I couldn't move for, I don't know how long passed before they talked me into moving, 20 minutes, half an hour. I felt just completely convinced that if I took one step onto that frozen creek, I would slide all the way to the bottom of the mountain and die. And I didn't have the language of panic attacks at that time. And later I described the situation to a friend and I said, I don't know what happened. I just freaked out. And she said, Eva, that was a panic attack. So that was really, I had gotten upset in situations in the mountains before. You know, I knew that I had this fear of exposed heights, slopes, but I had tried to push through it because I wanted to hang out with my friends and I wanted to be in the mountains. And it's, you know, it's also connected to my work professionally. I'm an outdoor adventure writer, so got to be able to go up mountains. And so I'd always just pushed through it before. And this time it was so far over the line, I couldn't push through. And it wasn't okay. It was too much. I had put myself at risk. I had put my friends at risk. And that was, you know, that was around the same time that I was starting to think about this sense of empowerment from having faced my fear of my mom's death. And so I thought, well, maybe I can fix this. Maybe this as it stands is not acceptable. And so maybe I can do something about this.
Do you remember why you had a panic attack about heights at that point? Because you'd had some uneasiness with it before. What was happening then?
I think I just let myself get too worn down to have any energy left to push through. Because I had done much more complicated and exposed and frightening things that day even. And I think I got too hungry, too cold, too wet, too tired. I think I was also, in retrospect, you know, worn out from grieving, and I just didn't have any resilience. I had no kind of spring in my elastic or whatever at that point. And I got scared and I just crashed.
And what do you remember thinking, you know, what was going through your mind? I know, you know, you talked about the fear, obviously, but also the embarrassment and also the you know, the nervousness that you put your friends at risk, as you mentioned. So what role did all of those things play in addition to the fear to making you wanted to get on top of it?
Right. It was utterly mortifying. I mean, totally humiliating to have people literally hold your hands for hours to help you down this, you know, gentle slope. And that for me has always been kind of a cycle of, I get scared, and if I try to crush it down so that I'm not showing it in front of people, it gets worse. But then also if I show it, I get embarrassed, and that sort of spirals. There's a sort of like a fear shame spiral that's not very pleasant to be in. Yeah, it's all tied together, right? And because you know, when I'm by myself, I'm better at managing my fear because there's nobody for me to feel self-conscious about.
Right. And I mean, I'm sure your friends were, and they sounded like it in the book. They were understanding and they were kind and all of that kind of stuff. But you started to put the pressure on yourself to deal with it. And we will get to sort of the therapies that you use, but let's talk about briefly your other phobia at the time, which was car crashes. And you seem to have a number of them in a very short period of time. So what was happening?
Yeah, I had a bad run there. I had one in high school that I think was sort of normal teenage recklessness. And I sort of thought I had learned my lesson from it. And then in 2014, I was hit by a U-Haul truck on the Alaska Highway that came across the yellow line and hit me. And that was probably the scariest of them, honestly, because I thought, you know, I was able to get just enough out of the way that it wasn't a head-on collision. It was more of a full side swipe. But if it had been a head-on, I wouldn't have survived. I think that's sort of definite. So that kind of messed with my head to begin with driving. And then in that winter of 2016, after my mom died, I had 2 rollovers, one in January on black ice and one in April in a hailstorm. And I'm still not sure if there's anything I really could have done to avoid either of them, or if it was just, freak events. My dad said, you spend enough hours on bad roads in the winter, it's going to catch up to you eventually and your luck ran out. I don't know, but the confluence of those 3 crashes, the being hit by the U-Haul and then the 2 rollovers, left me with flashbacks, real sort of paranoia while driving in any kind of icy or wet conditions. I was sort of convinced on any given curve that the car might just start rolling. I would have these panics. I wouldn't be able to breathe. I'd be sort of crying while driving and having to try to pull over so I could finish crying. It was pretty intense and not great for living in a place with 8 months of winter and lots of 2-lane highways.
Right. And you need to get around and you need a car. It was the second of those when you were driving your mom's red Subaru that seemed to be like a catalyst in many ways. That wasn't the most dangerous perhaps, but it really did something. What did it do?
It left me just with no faith in myself. It really undermined my sense of competence, my ability to be safe on the roads. I think that was, again, these things all tangled together. I think it was the combination of, destroying my mom's Subaru, which she loved, and then being like, I can't believe I just had another accident. Like, how did this happen again? That just really sort of crumbled my sense of self as a competent adult who can be trusted to drive in society. And it was super embarrassing, like to have to tell people that happened. And, again, people were understanding. I had a friend who texted me and said, I remember how it felt the first time I broke something that my dad left me, like she got it right away, the emotional component. But it was so it was all of this stuff was sort of circulating. This was the last accident was about 2 months after the panic attack on the ice climb. So all these factors were kind of circulating together in my life and my brain and my feelings when I decided to do this book.
Right. I mean, it really is quite something. And it just is a testament to really how tough you are. I mean, you've chosen this lifestyle in the Yukon. You're an outdoor writer. You have all kinds of adventures. And so what does Eva do when it comes time to face her fear of heights? Well, she signs up to go skydiving, naturally, as anyone would not. So tell us about that decision. Why? And what happened there? Tell us a bit about that story.
I had this notion. I mean, we know, right? The idea is if you want to overcome your fears, you have to face them, right? There's no hiding from your fear if you want to resolve them. And so I decided to take that as literally as possible. And I thought, well, okay, if I want to prove to myself that I have nothing to be afraid of, I should do the scariest thing I can think of. And so, yeah, I signed up to go skydiving in a tandem jump with a dive master. And it turns out that's not how exposure therapy works. They don't actually recommend maximum terror for therapeutic treatment of phobias these days. I don't think it hurt me. It was horrible. I really hoped I would it would be like a bubble bursting, like I'd be so scared, and I would push through, and then I'd be like, whoa, this is amazing. I'm finding my bliss or something. But that was not, I screamed expletives through 31 seconds of free fall. I did not enjoy a moment of it. And then I had to kind of regroup. And that's when I had to say, okay, well, what does the science say about how to actually fix this? Because it turns out skydiving is not the solution.
Right. Yeah. I mean, great realization there. You had to go through a lot of stress and pain to get to that point. You decided, or you came across a treatment in Amsterdam to deal with this fear of heights. It was new. It involved a pill. And so you traveled across the earth to get there, and it made all the difference, which is mind-boggling if people haven't heard about this treatment. And what made you, I don't know, want to risk going all that way for a fairly experimental treatment at that point? And then we'll hear about the treatment in a sec.
Yeah, and remember transcontinental flights? Those were something.
So long ago.
Yeah. I will almost look forward to a red eye again when all this is over. But Yeah, at first I didn't think that I would be able to get the treatment myself. I just wanted to see it in action. It was so experimental. I thought she might only be doing certain trials. So there's this clinical psychologist in Amsterdam who has pioneered this drug treatment therapy for phobias. It is a combination of memory science. Sort of, she uses some of the latest understanding of the neuroscience of memory, combined with pharmaceuticals, to sort of untether people's phobia reactions from their fears, sort of like decouple the train. And I had read about it. It sounded amazing. It sounded too good to be true, frankly. It sounded like science fiction. It gets compared to, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, but it doesn't erase your memories. It just sort of detaches them from your present, which still sounds kind of creepy.
But it's also exposure therapy, right?
It is. So what she does is what we now understand about memory is that there's a protein synthesis sort of reaction in our brains when we form long-term memories, but also when we call them up out of storage and sort of take them out and look at them and then put them away again. So that's the dynamic that she plays with. So she has to trigger your phobia memories very strongly before she can alter them, or before the drug can do its work. And so she gets people to what she would say is like 80 to 90% of your, out of 100, of your maximum phobic fear. And then she gives you this drug, propranolol. It's a common beta blocker. People watching have probably taken it for blood pressure or stage fright. Taken normally in the day-to-day, it has a short-term effect. But when she combines it with this memory science, it appears to be more durable. And so in my case, I really wasn't sure what she was going to do to trigger my fear of heights, because Amsterdam is sort of known for its flatness. And there are no mountains around there. Ultimately, what she did is she put me in the bucket of a ladder truck at a fire station and sent it up as high as it would go. And it was a super windy day, and it was like the bucket was shaking around, and I was terrified. And she sort of pushed and pushed and pushed until I couldn't take any more. And then we went down to the ground, and she gave me this pill and told me to go have a good night's sleep. And the next day I went back to the fire station and I was taking selfies in the bucket of the ladder truck. I was completely fine.
So I know you are explaining it, but how do you explain it though? I mean, do you actually believe it yourself, even though you're living through it? It sounds too good to be true as you.
I have to believe it because I didn't think it was going to work. So it can't be the placebo effect, because you have to believe in it for the placebo effect to work, right? And her results are more consistent than a placebo effect in any case. It works best when it's a very simple phobia, where sort of the presence or absence of the object of fear is very clear cut, like snakes, rats, these sorts of things, are spiders. These are very clear. Heights is a little bit murkier. Heights is sort of subjective, right? And as you get more and more murky and more into something like trauma rather than phobia, then the process does break down some, because the trigger is so much trickier.
Does it work for trauma? I mean, what have you found out about that?
She has been trying to adapt it for trauma with, I think it's been less successful on that front, because of the difficulty of triggering the memories. Triggering trauma memories safely is a problematic concept. If you have trauma from being in an explosion, how can a psychologist safely and ethically trigger that? There's no equivalent of the fire truck, right? Yeah. So I think that's the hitch.
It was interesting to read the confidence that this gave you, and you went back and you went back another time the next day, and there was a film crew with you as you explain it. And so all was going well. You were back up there taking selfies, as you say. You get back down on the ground. The film crew wants a few more shots of you. So you go back up. In the meantime, the wind is also picked up. One of the camera guys couldn't go in, so you get up even higher. But then you started to have some doubts. And this was an interesting insight when you had that reaction, and then the explainer from the psychologist. Just tell us about what you learned about you and fear and the explanation.
This was sort of the most important part for me, and it's something I'm still working on in terms of the aftermath of this treatment now, a couple years on, is so I did. I started to get scared the second time we went back up, and I had been totally fine the first time. And it was, you know, we went back up and it was really windy. We were up really high. It was clear to me that the firefighter who was at the bucket controls was starting to get a little bit antsy. Meryl, the psychologist, was getting nervous. And I was like, I wasn't really scared that like the bucket, I wasn't scared that we were going to get blown out of the bucket or something. I was scared that I was going to undo my treatment. I was like, if I get too scared right now, am I going to wreck it? Is it going to be not fixed anymore? I was sort of scared to flex this new muscle, you know, it was so new. And then, so we came down and I was pretty unhappy about the situation. And Meryl, Dr. Kint said, you know, well, that was actually scary. Like that was scary. I was scared. He was scared. You were scared. We were all scared. It was a scary situation. And she said, I haven't cured you of fear of heights in its entirety, because it's very reasonable to be afraid of heights in lots of contexts. She was like, what I've tried to do is to cure you of irrational fears in situations where you're actually safe. And so your work now is to learn sort of new boundaries of like, to accept that when you have a fear reaction now, it's valid and not over the top, not irrational. Now you have to learn to trust that instinct, because it's still going to come up sometimes, because you shouldn't feel totally fine standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. That's scary. That's dangerous. And so it was this first clue that once I got my unreasonable fears reined in, if I was able to do that, I would still have work to do in terms of managing my relationship with fear, because I would have to learn to trust my fear reaction, which is something that doesn't come naturally to those of us who are used to being too afraid. You know, we always say, oh, don't listen, shove it down, push through. But fear is there for a reason, right? It's there to keep us alive.
Yeah, it is there to keep us alive, and that's an interesting distinction, sort of the irrational fears versus the real ones that are legit. I mean, when you met people who are better at managing those irrational fears, is there anything that they had in common? Is there anything that you can take away from that you're using for yourself?
Mm-hmm. So we tend to think of it as sort of like fearlessness, bravery, you know, pushing through, being impervious to fear. But what scientists increasingly understand as the ideal is actually sort of picking your moments appropriately. It's threat assessment. It's saying, should I be afraid right now? And being able to respond accurately and appropriately. So it's not about never being afraid or pushing through recklessly. And it's not about seeing threats everywhere. It's this happy medium of, the example I use is, you know, if you are camping and you see a grizzly bear, that's a very valid threat. You're like, oh, there's a bear, that's a threat. If you don't see that as a threat, you might have a problem. If you are lying awake at night worrying about bears, you might have a problem, but maybe that's reasonable. But maybe if you're lying awake in your tent at night worrying about bears and you're not in bear country, then that's sort of like, that's when you've moved from reasonable fear to unreasonable fear. And in the other direction is like, I love bears, I hope I see some bears, you know, let's cuddle some bears. So there's this spectrum of reactions, and the ideal is to sort of be in the middle where you are accurately monitoring the world around you for threats and responding appropriately.
And how are you doing with this ability in the time since you've been to Amsterdam for this treatment?
Really well. Yeah, I tested it in a couple different ways. I haven't gone rock climbing yet. I do intend to. All the gyms were closed for the last few months, but I have gone on a really steep hike that I would have previously expected to sort of manage on my hands and knees sobbing. And I was fine. I was upright. I felt cautious but calm, which I think was an appropriate level of, you know, it was not a place to stroll. I've gone ziplining and actually managed to enjoy it. Yeah, I think I've been managing it so far. I still have more sort of testing to do.
Right. And so do you think, I mean, overall from what you're seeing right now, is this why you pushed so hard to deal with this, because of the difference it would make in your life?
Yeah, it's a lot. I have a lot more freedom now. You know, I don't have to, if a friend invites me on a hike, I don't have to say, oh, well, like, am I going to cry? how steep is it going to be? Am I going to freak out? I can just go now and be confident that if there's a hiking trail there, I can navigate it. And that's not something that would be worth a flight to Amsterdam for everyone. It just depends on your life and your priorities. And for me, not being able to be in the mountains with my friends or professionally for work was too much to give away. But for other people, if I still lived in Ottawa, it might not be such a problem as it is here. But for me, it was worth the effort to get that freedom back.
Right. You also talk about, the fear around car crashes and crashing again and not trusting yourself behind the wheel of a car also started to impact your life there. As you say, that there's nothing but 2-lane highways and you have to travel a lot for your work. So you went and did something called EMDR to deal with your car crash fear. And tell us just briefly how that works and how it worked for you.
Sure. It's another sort of vaguely sci-fi sounding therapy treatment. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's one of sort of a suite of newish trauma therapies. There's been a lot of work on PTSD and trauma support, particularly post-Gulf War and with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan in the last 20, 30 years. There's been a lot of progress made. And EMDR was invented before any of those wars. In the late 80s, but it has really grown, I think, in the last 3 decades. It sounds very odd. It involves moving your eyes back and forth. The eye movement is the key. And so originally it was literally a therapist wagging her finger in front of your eyes, but now they have different ways to prompt the eye movement. You can do headphones that beep. I held sort of buzzing pods in my hands and the buzz just automatically made my eyes go. And so a therapist who's trained in EMDR talks you through your trauma, whatever the event was that has left these lingering memories and hypervigilance, and while you have your eyes closed with the eye movements being prompted. And they've done hundreds of clinical studies on this method, and they don't know why it works, and they were quite skeptical about it for a long time. It's now sort of widely accepted, but it was viewed as quackery, I think, through much of the 90s. Something about the eye movement seems to get involved. Again, it's similar to the Amsterdam treatment. It changes your relationship to the memories of the event that caused the trauma. And so something about the eye movement while you're accessing these memories to talk them through seems to sort of, I sometimes think of trauma memories as sort of like sticking out of a filing cabinet incorrectly and you can't get the door closed, and then they're just sort of jammed into the front of your brain where they don't belong. And so in my case, that meant when I was driving, I'd be having flashbacks, I'd be picturing the car rolling, I'd be hearing the sounds of glass shattering, the windshield ripping out, my belongings hitting me, all the things that happened. In this very vivid way that's not normal for memories that have been stored correctly. And so it's like the eye movement seems to assist somehow in getting those filed back correctly so the drawer can close. It doesn't erase them, it doesn't undo their power. I can still think about the car accidents that I had, and if I think hard enough about them, I will get upset. But they don't come out unprompted anymore, and they don't sort of grab me by the throat while I'm driving. It was quite remarkable. It was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. I could feel it sort of physically working while it was happening. It was very strange.
What did that feel like, physically working? What do you mean?
Like I felt there were like pains moving around in my arms and hands and chest, and my face was sort of moving without me consciously. It was very, I don't know how to explain it, but I felt my body sort of rearranging itself. I know that sounds really woo-woo, but I found this quote from a woman who had EMDR after surviving the Oklahoma City bombing. And she said, EMDR was the strangest experience of her life with the exception of the bomb. So it was like getting blown up was really weird and EMDR was almost as weird.
Yes. Pause for 1 second there, Eva. I just want to let people know that we're going to take a few questions, I think, in a minute or two. And if you'd like to send a question, there's a little Q&A on the bottom of your screen, on the bottom right there. So if you want to send a few questions in, I'll ask Eva what's on your mind. We have one question so far, so now's your chance to get in line there. Eva, I mean, one of the things you touch on there, and one thing that maybe we all believe we instinctively know about fear and phobia is that it starts with childhood experiences in many times, in many ways. And even if it's not a direct link, that kind of experience can cause a fear or a phobia in other ways. Were you able to pinpoint anything directly yourself that led you here?
I'm not certain in my case. I do know that my first time I can remember being afraid was at Pearson. Good place to be scared. And I fell down the escalator at Pearson when I was 3 or 4. And so I've wondered if that is at the root of my fear of sort of, because my heights fear was always very precise. It was always a fear of exposure, slopes, and any sense that I could fall. It was never about airplanes or elevators or even bridges, as long as I didn't feel like I could fall over the railing. Whereas other people's fear of heights is much more generalized. Mine was entirely about a sense of exposure to falling. And so I've wondered if that is the root of it. It also, my dad was afraid of heights when he was younger and sort of worked through it. And there's some evidence that phobias can be genetic. They don't totally understand where phobias come from, and it seems to be sort of different explanations might apply for different people, or there might be a confluence of factors, like maybe my genetic predisposition to fear of heights was exacerbated by falling down the escalator at Pearson. I'm still a little nervous around escalators, but thankfully there's only one in the Yukon Territory, so.
Yeah, right, but not elevators. You have no issue with elevators?
No issue with elevators, no.
Interesting. Okay, we've got a couple of questions, Eva. Just hang on for 1 sec. I'm going to pull them up here. So the first question is, fear keeps us alive, but also keeps us from living. Is there a way to tell which fears need to be ignored and which ones will keep us alive? That's a great question.
That's an excellent question. And it's a hard one to answer. I think that for me, figuring that out is going to be sort of a lifelong process. I've come closer than I was, but the closest I came, and I spent some time in the book trying to think about, well, okay, now that I've fixed, my car accident fear and my heights fear, how do I tell when I should be afraid or not? How do I learn to trust that gut again? And the closest thing I could come to is that my irrational fears tended to freeze me, and they tended to make me feel fuzzy and sort of stressed and confused. And the times when I've felt fears that I think were really, really true threats, looking back, I was driven with clarity and driven into movement. I think like I instead of freezing and thinking I'm going to die, I had this clarity of motion of like, okay, you need to take evasive action now. And I think that's maybe a hint of how you can know when to trust it or not, is this sort of the fuzziness and the frozen versus clarity and motion. That was the closest I've come. But I think everybody has to figure that out for themselves to some extent, because all of us have such a different perspective on threats and what they mean to us. I think that's gonna, and I don't think it's a lesson that you learn once and then coast.
Yeah, right. Are there things that you're afraid of now? Are you afraid of COVID-19, of the impact that that's having on all of our lives? Because there's so many uncertainties there. There's a lot of room for the mind to wander into these places.
Yeah, it's been an interesting time to think back on the research that I did for this book, because I've definitely gone through waves of fear and anxiety since March. I started working at a bar part-time earlier this summer. And the night before, I think my second or third shift, I had this vivid dream that I caught COVID and gave it to all the customers, and I was a super spreader. It was like this horrible nightmare of like giving everybody this disease. And so it's like, there's definitely some fears at play there. I don't know that I have like a pervasive fear of catching and spreading COVID. Like a lot of people, I got a pandemic dog, and I worry about him a lot. I've had a lot of like dog anxiety that I'm trying to, I'm like, oh, he's gonna get hit by a car, or he's gonna eat something he shouldn't, or I don't know. It's coming out in different ways, I think, these days for me. I don't have any new really potent fears like the ones I deal with in the book, thankfully, yet. If I acquire them at some point, I'll have better tools to try to move through them.
Yeah. Okay, let's take another question here. At what point in your journey did you decide to we sort of covered this one. Let's, why did you decide to write the book? At what point? And I think we covered that early on, just a couple of things coming together, the three things after your mom passed away. Let's take this question, Eva. What do you do if you are overpowered by fear?
I guess hope you have friends around to hold your hands. In my case, I think stopping and taking a breath. If you often in my case, the fear did literally stop me in place, and so then stopping and taking a breath isn't necessarily what you need to do. But in the times when I would be freaking out driving, I would pull over. I would say, okay, you need to deal with this. Pull over, breathe through it. Wait until you calm down. I think taking a breath is always a good idea. There are other coping mechanisms that I learned in therapy that involve sort of conjuring up what they call my resources. So I have like a happy place that I can think about when I need, which is something I did actually in Amsterdam. I used the car accident therapy after I got really upset about the film crew and thinking that my treatment was going to be ruined. I sat down on my hotel room bed and I went back to the resources that I'd been taught about in therapy. I had, I think there was a happy place, and then like a nurturing figure and a source of wisdom and a protector. And these were things that we had worked on in therapy, also with the eye movements to try to sort of strengthen them and have them be ready to be called upon. So, I think even when we don't have someone literally there to hold our hands, there's memories and thoughts that we can reach others through when we need support from other people. Calling a friend can be a good option. We suffer with this stuff in silence a lot. It's been amazing since this book came out, how many people have told me about all the things that scare them too. And a huge number of people that I know here in Whitehorse are also afraid of heights. And I had no idea. I thought I was like the only idiot in the Yukon who's scared of the mountains,
No, many. I lived in Whitehorse for many years, and I have to say, just to add on to what you're talking about there, I think, when your fear, your phobia starts to become a real barrier where it's stopping you from living and having a great life, then sort of uncovering how you might be able to deal with those things, starting with a big deep breath is always a great thing, though. Eva, this is from Katie O'Brien. She says, hi Eva, I love Nerve and have followed all of your outdoor writing for years. What are you writing for your next book, and what's up next for your outdoor writing?
Good questions. Hi, Katie. I am hoping, I don't have definite plans for my next book yet, but I am hoping. I was really fascinated by what I learned about neurology and neuroscience when I dipped into those areas for Nerve. And so I'm hoping to write more about the human brain and how amazing it is, and how we learn what we know about how it works and how little we know about how it works. So I'm hoping to be able to pursue more questions around neurology and neuroscience. In terms of next outdoor stuff, I don't know yet. It's a bit tricky right now to figure out. So much of my writing has been around, races or big events, festivals, gatherings. So I have to figure out what I can do next on that front. That's, but I do know, I don't know if I'll write about it or not, but I do know I'm going to learn to skijor this winter, which is going to involve having my husky towing me across frozen lakes on skis. So that will be my winter adventure.
Right. And you can do it just the two of you. So you can write about that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, right.
And it will be flat. So not that I'm afraid of heights anymore, but just
exactly. Win-win. This is from Marianne. She said, I have found that during this pandemic, so many old fears have resurfaced, but so has grief at losing my mom about 5 years ago. Did you have to, and how did you uncouple grief from fear?
Yeah, I think that they're really connected. I have found myself thinking more about my mom and mom's death, particularly in the early months of lockdown too, which I don't always do anymore. I think um, grief and fear are, I don't know if it's possible to entirely uncouple them. I think grief frightens us because it feels so powerful and so permanent when it's happening, and it is permanent. But of course, it it ebbs to a more manageable level. I think fear of losing people is something that a lot of us live with, and I'm certainly not cured of that fear. What I feel now is that I have one firsthand knowledge that these feelings are temporary, that they're not going to be a part of you forever necessarily in that sort of awful way that you fear they will be. Of course, like loss is with you forever, but not in that sort of life controlling way that it feels like they might be. Like I'm gonna feel this way forever, that they are temporary, and also that I know now that I have the tools to sort of move through them. At the start of the pandemic, I was really freaked out. I was having, shortness of breath, and which is great when you're trying to monitor for COVID symptoms, and a lot of anxiety about what was going to happen, professionally and personally, and being on the other side of the country from my family. And a lot of my life has been, my work life is all built around travel. There's a lot to be freaked out about. And then I thought, well, okay, maybe you've got a really hard 2 years coming up. Maybe you got a lot of hard times coming from this, but you have the tools to work through that, and you know that now. And I know that because of the work I did for this book. I joked that before the pandemic, I said, well, whatever happens with reviews, whatever happens with sales, anything else, reception, they can't take my launch party away from me. And of course I didn't get to do a launch party, but the other thing that can't be taken away from me no matter what is what I learned from doing this work, right? And my quality of life is higher after working on this book than it was beforehand. So
Yeah.
that's something to hold on to as well. It's just what we learn from these things.
I was going to ask how it has changed you, but you've answered it very well there. The book itself has gotten a lot of attention. It's gotten reviewed all over the place and all over the world. I mean, is it because of the time we're in? Do you think it is really touching a nerve that the people are so unsettled and afraid?
See what you did there. I think that's part of it. Yeah, some of the media coverage, because the timeline was so tight, some of the media coverage that we got was already lined up before the pandemic really reached North America, at least before North America acknowledged that it was here. But yeah, I do think there's been added interest because of the subject matter. I think not everybody responds to a scary situation by wanting more information about fear, but I think enough of us do say, okay, well, what's happening to me right now? What does it mean to live in this sort of fearful way? And so I think that has been, I hope that it's helpful for people. It's not self-help. It's really focused on my experiences, but I do hope that people find it useful in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a fabulous book, Eva. I think we'll leave it there because I think we get a really great sense of you really putting yourself out there to teach all of us, and your personal story has been inspirational as somebody who's gone through some phobias and fears and fear of flying and all of that kind of stuff. It really speaks to a lot of us, and it's so well written, and it's a real page turner, and you've you've been very generous in how you've shared your own personal story there. So I really enjoyed it. So thank you, and it's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Thanks so much, Lucy. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and hope you're all safe and well.
Yeah, and this is the book, guys, Nerve, by Eva Holland. I would urge you to pick it up. It's a great read. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of your evening there in Whitehorse. And I think, folks, do we just say goodbye in the Ottawa Public Library?
Sean said he's not coming back after.
He's not coming back. All right. All right. There's Catherine from OPL saying That's it. So thanks everybody, and thanks Eva.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.